All right, so I showed you the first step where I surrounded the three sides with concrete blocks and left a little expansion gap between the metal of the stove and the blocks that I put on all sides of it. Now we're going to look at the top. So the same principle applies. The top of the stove will slightly expand upwards as the stove heats up. So ideally, you don't want your thermal mass or your masonry that is packed around the stove to be in direct contact with the top, just like you don't want it to be in direct contact with the sides. So I have cut these pieces of slate here that are just going to raise the level up from this, where the top of these concrete blocks, where I have a piece of equal size on either side there. And I'll show you what those are for in a minute. But the first thing I need kind of a lintel over the top, over the very front of this, that will support kind of the top of the masonry superstructure that I'm going to build up over this, which is going to be made of cob. So I needed a lintel that's going to sit in front of the door so that I can pack masonry all the way back behind it, starting from here. And I wanted to, if you could, you could put you could start your masonry or thermal mass overlapping on the top of the stove back here instead of all the way up here. But if I put it here, then I can drop this masonry, this lintel that I have, I can drop it down a little bit so that you can't see into the front of the stove and see the little gap, the expansion gap there. I didn't want to see the expansion gap when looking at the front of the stove because I think it'll look ugly. So that's why I've extended kind of where these cement blocks are forward in front of the stove itself so that I can put a lower lintel piece that will kind of hide the expansion gap that'll be up here. So I'll show you what I mean. So this is a piece of slate that I had laying around that I just cut to size. So this is my front lintel. So that's going to go here. And again, where this butts up against the front leading edge of the metal of the stove, I'm leaving a couple millimeter gaps. I haven't snugged it exactly touching the leading edge here. I've left a little gap there. So that will be in front, hanging out in front of the stove, and the door can still open, so still have access into the stove. I'll be able to load the box and shut it without any problem. And when I've finished building the entire cob enclosure for this leading edge of this lintel will be slightly exposed as kind of a decorative feature. So that's the first part. And then the next one back will be sitting on these small strips of slate that I've cut. Again, the point here was just to raise the level up off of these cement blocks to get above the top of this stove. So this, the top of these slates sit a couple millimeters proud further up than the top of the Woodburner. So this is my next piece of slate. I had to cut a small little indent out of this back edge to give some extra expansion gap space against the flue exit there for the flue pipe. So that goes on here, like that. And then I just have now, I still need to cover these parts of the top of the stove. So I was thinking about how best to do that and didn't really come up with anything great other than two kind of diagonal pieces of slate that will again sit slightly off the top of the stove, held up by this strip of slate, and the back concrete block, which is already a couple mil proud of the top of the Woodburner. So I cut a couple more pieces of slate just to fit in there like that. And like this. So that gets the majority of the top. That gets the majority of the top of the Woodburner covered. And yeah, I think that's kind of that's the main work for the primary enclosure around the Woodburner itself. Now, basically, all the main surfaces of the Woodburner that will be kind of interacting with the masonry or the thermal mass, they've all been covered and protected with expansion gaps, and load supporting masonry is holding that expansion gap from collapsing, right? So I'm not going to lose my expansion gap because I have all this strong core of masonry directly surrounding the Woodburner. One other thing to note about the expansion gaps, in some places they're actually bigger than I want them to be, but I just can't make them any narrower, because basically like something on the Woodburner will be sticking out in the wrong place, and it's making, I can't put my cement block as close to the main part of the side as I would like. So I have to stand my concrete block off to accommodate that little sticking out piece. So in those cases where I have a place in the expansion gap that's larger than I would like, I'm going to pack them with copper wool. Instead of steel wool, I've bought copper wool online, and I will pack those gaps with copper wool. Copper because it's a very good conductor of heat. It's a good thermal conductor. And so because it's copper wool, it can still squish and kind of expand and contract as the stove expands and contracts, but it will remain in contact with the stove and the thermal mass on either side, regardless of the expansion. This is my theory, my hope. And because it's in constant contact with both the hot steel stove and the cold thermal mass of the masonry, I'm hoping that it will continuously draw heat out of the Woodburner core and dump it into the cold masonry. So it's kind of an expansion, thermally, I don't know what you call it, a thermally conductive expansion gap or something like that. So I haven't put that copper wool in yet because it hasn't arrived, but that will be stuffed into any of these gaps all around the main core here, where I have a space that's too big that I can't otherwise fill as closely as I would like. So after that copper wool is in, my next step is to basically sculpt an external shell around this from cob. Cob, if you don't know, is simply clay, or so basically subsoil, but clay subsoil, mixed with sand and or gravel, and oftentimes there's some kind of fiber added, like straw or hay or jute fiber or horse manure even, so some kind of natural fiber. I think sheep's wool has been used at times, so adding some kind of natural fiber into the mix to improve the cob's flexural strength, or its ability to flex without cracking and become more flexible. So I will make, and that's a very traditional recipe, that's a very traditional building material, cob, especially in places like Europe, but all over, including Native Americans and many other groups. I guess you could probably say cob or adobe is kind of a universal human building material. Europeans just call it cob. So I will be creating a big batch of that from clay and sand and some gravel, and probably will add some hay to that as well. And then I will pack in all around this on all sides with cob and sculpt a large dome over the entire thing. And that dome will kind of extend down here and will come to cover the slate hearth that this Woodburner is currently sitting on, and it will come all the way up and hug the top. At the top, it will hug the exhaust pipe here all the way up to there. I don't want to go any higher than that because I have a windowsill here to contend with. But yeah, I'm going to come all the way up to there, and you'll have kind of a big traditional earthen pizza oven dome looking superstructure over this thing with an exposed lintel on the front. So I will update you with the next video. Thanks, bye.